here with an episode of Live with Greg. I'm here with Bernard, the editor-in-chief and founder of Sensitive Skin magazine.
Yes, I am.
All right.
Indeed.
All right. And we know each other not,
So true.
but we'll see what we learn today.
All right. What better way to get to know each other than an interview?
All right,
Yeah.
cool.
I have to say, too, it's funny. This is for whatever reason, this is the second podcast I've done in like a week. I did another one for another friend last week. And I was thinking, I really should start a podcast, too. And I started thinking about all of these people I know who I'd love to interview. And some of them are people I've known 20 years. And then I was thinking, like, if I actually did like sort of standard interview, like, so where'd you grow up? And what'd your parents, like, I don't know this about so many people that I've known some pretty well, I think, or hung out with a lot at least. So I think it's a good thing to do.
Right on. I support it for that reason. Mm-hmm. It's a great excuse to call someone
right.
that you want to know. Yeah. All right. So, so earlier I said that I thought your magazine was sort of a punk ethics underground art magazine.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of close. I don't know about. Sure, we have punk elements, but I'd say it's more of a New York City underground. Started downtown New York City underground, and I started it in. I could actually look. I have the original issue back when it was known as Peau Sensible. Look at that! December 1991. So the end of the year 91. I'd been living in France for a few years, and I made my living along with my friend Norman Douglas, who's another writer. He was also in Paris at the same time. And I made my living as a word processor and desktop publisher. So I had a little Mac. I had like one of those little Macs.
Right.
And it was an SE30, I think it was called. We were both writers, and we knew a bunch of other writers, and we're like, hey, we know how to do this stuff. Let's put out a magazine. So we actually put out a very small flyer in Paris. I got a copy around it somewhere. Anyway, I moved back to New York, and Norman was back there too, and I said, let's start a magazine, and didn't know what to call it. And I was in the shower one day, and I still had a bottle of my shampoo I brought back from France, and it said Pour la Peau Sensible. I said, all right, we'll use that. It was this ridiculous name. And we just like kind of laughed at it. We laughed at like hearing people pronounce it. Peau Sensible. So anyway, it just seemed like a ridiculous venture, so we gave it this ridiculous sort of name, and then we're stuck with it at a certain point. And anyway, started it with Norman, and this first issue, Darius James, Steve Cannon, John Ferris, and the dancer Patricia Winter. We all sat together and put content in here. And came up with this very first one was just like little stapled together things, 8 pages long, and then. For whatever reason, it was a good time to do that. It seemed like there wasn't a whole lot of other people doing stuff like that in New York at that time in 1991. Sort of like a dead period for whatever reason, and it took off, and we started doing it one every few months, and more people got into it, and we ended up having people like Richard Hell and Eileen Miles and all these like really well-known people, and we were doing events and getting hundreds of people to show up, and it was great. It was really exciting. And at some point around the third or fourth issue, I gave up and changed the name to Sensitive Skin. This is like I'm just tired of people mangling the name. I can't take it anymore. Right. So we switched it to Sensitive Skin, and at some point along the way, I had like falling out with all those people, but they were all helpful, and I appreciate the work they did early on in doing it, but I ended up firing them all and working with a couple other writers, Christian X. Hunter and Rob Harden, and and put out a couple more issues. And then I got to a certain point, and we were talking about this before, the camera rolled, and I remember I was at a point where I was like, I kept doing it and I wasn't quite sure why. And I was actually driving around New York with Richard Hell. He had just gotten back from California and he bought like a convertible 68 Dodge Charger that he'd gotten in California and drove back to New York. And we were just driving around New York. And I was talking to him about it. I was like, why are you doing it? And I was like, I don't know. Why am I doing it? And then I stopped doing it, basically, because I was unsure of myself as a writer, and I didn't quite know why I was doing this. And I'd also had moved from, like, word processing and desktop publishing. And probably because of this magazine, because we started putting art in there, I started getting into Photoshop. And I thought Photoshop was a blast. And I moved from there. I discovered a program called Director. I don't know if you remember that. Back in the CD-ROM craze. I don't know if you remember, for about maybe 18 months.
Yes.
There was a section at Barnes and Noble where they had all the interactive multimedia CD-ROMs. I was like, that's what I want to do. And anyway, the whole art scene, the downtown art scene, everybody was like, not everybody, I'd say virtually everybody was either on drugs or alcohol. And I stopped doing drugs and alcohol, and I kind of wanted to get away from that scene. So that's one of the reasons why I had the falling out with a lot of people. I was just like, I gotta clean up my act. And let's see, it's funny, I hadn't thought about this for a while, but so two things happened simultaneously. A couple of my friends started to get published. Like Richard Hell got published. He put out this big book, and that got a lot of attention. And Darius James put out Negrophobia, which was this kind of sensation at the time. And a couple of other friends, and I started looking at them, and I was like, well, yeah, they're getting all this attention. And Darius especially was funny. He was hanging around with all sorts of movie stars and whatever, wanted to hang around. And he still I remember broke his eyeglasses, and couldn't afford to buy a new pair of eyeglasses. And I was like, this is what success looks like in the writing business these days. It somehow didn't look all that, glamorous to me. Even he was hanging around with Uma Thurman and John Cusack and people like that. And I was like, well, that's nice, but can't afford to buy yourself a pair of glasses. That's horrible. So anyway, so there was that going on. And also I started to get into the multimedia stuff. And I was like, wow, so people are willing to pay me a lot of money to do this. And saying, you're great, thank you so much, as opposed to the ultra competitiveness of the art scene where people are like, you suck, and maybe you'd get $10 for doing a reading or something like that. And I was like, I think I'm just gonna. So I actually made a very conscious decision. So we're around 1995, 96. I was like, I'm done. I'm not gonna be an artist anymore, even though still many of my friends were active in the arts or whatever. I was just like, I'm just going to do this computer programming thing. I think it's really fun. And I'm for the first time in my life, I'm actually making a good living. So I just did that through the rest of the 90s. And, it was really booming back then. It was also great, too, because, I was basically a bum. I was 32 years old and at one point, sleeping on a friend's couch and whatever. And I didn't care about material possessions or whatever, but at the same time, I didn't want to be 50 and sleeping on somebody's couch like some of my friends were at the time still. It's I want a little bit more out of life, so I made this conscious decision. So I'm just going to focus all my energy on this rather than trying to do this as a day job and then spending my real energy trying to write, which seems like it's getting me nowhere anyway. And even if it does get you somewhere, it still seems like nowhere.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll do this. And it was also great too, because like I said, I had no real qualifications or whatever to be doing this stuff, but nobody knew how to do it at the time. It was the wild, wild west. Nobody cared what I'd been doing 6 months earlier. They were like, oh, you can build me a website today? Here's this giant pile of money. It's like, oh, this is pretty good. So, that went on that went on for a while, and then also, I started. I got married and had a couple of kids, and there's all of everything that goes along with that, right? And it's like now you're trapped. Now you really gotta like keep making money, and it was ridiculous too. At a certain point, like by 1999, it's just like the work was coming in. Like I couldn't. Had to turn down jobs. I was hiring people, subcontracting, and it's funny. And so I had all this extra money. So I started. Actually, I was living in this apartment building on East 6th Street, off 2nd Avenue. And there were these apartments for sale in the building, and they were really cheap at the time. So at first, I bought the apartment next door to me for like $50,000. Yeah, what's really crazy. So I bought an apartment. I bought an apartment there in *95. I bought a 1-bedroom apartment for $32,000 in the East Village. Wow. And then 3 years later, after I had my daughter, I bought a studio next door for $50,000. And people are like, "You're paying $50,000 for a studio? That's crazy. You just bought a 1-bedroom for like almost half that." And it's like, well, it doesn't matter what it used to be. It matters what it is now. I think it's still a pretty good deal. And I ended up buying a couple more apartments in that building and selling them. And so I ended up owning like a 3-bedroom apartment in the East Village, like free and clear pretty much, which is like crazy. Again, because it's like 5 years, 6 years earlier, 8 years earlier, I'd been sleeping on somebody's couch. So it kind of worked out well. And then we had the .com crash and 9/11, and just everything went to hell. And like my phone changed from ringing off the hook to didn't ring literally for a year. There was no work to be had. Everybody was out of work. But I still ended up sticking with that stuff, and I moved from director like fell by the wayside, and everybody was into Flash, so I got into Flash and started doing that stuff, and that was fun. And I got a job for at MTV, and I was doing kids games for Nickelodeon, which was like really awesome because it was so great when that job was like a great way to impress like 6 to 8 year olds. Like I'd meet my friends' kids and they're like, "Do you know SpongeBob?" I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do. I've met SpongeBob." So that went on, and then so what was it, in 2006, an old friend of mine who lived out here in Mill Valley, Bay Area, came out there and said, "So, you're a Flash guy and you work for MTV, and you must be really good." And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm pretty good at it." So he said, "You should come work for me." And I was like, "Really?" And he owned an ad agency in Sausalito, and frankly, at that time, so my kids were like 9 and 6 at the time, my 2 daughters, and I was sick of living in the city, and New York City is like, I still tell people, if anybody younger asks me, I'm like, "Yeah, go. You're single? Absolutely, go. You should live there a few years at least. It's like the greatest place in the world if you're in your 20s or even your 30s and you're single. You can just like have a great time. And it's really exciting, and but by that time I was like, I had a couple of kids. I was like, my late 30s, and I was like, I really wanted to leave. I was really, it's a great place to leave if you can go out and have fun every night. But if like you're staying home and then not doing that because you're taking care of kids, and then you're taking kids to school in the morning and trying to figure out how to get to the school 15 blocks away when it's raining, and it became a real pain in the ass. So I wanted to leave New York for a few years, and I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go, and I'd looked at upstate New York, and I was like, no, this is too desolate, and looked in like Flagstaff, Arizona. We'd been to a few places, and then so my friend said, "Yeah, come on out, I'll fly you out and just take a look." And I got to Sausalito, and I was like, "Okay, this'll do." His place was right on the water, the Sausalito, and there's the boats and the mountains behind us and the fog, and it's like, oh, and there's San Francisco right over there, and here's Mill Valley, and there's like all these redwood trees and nature and whatever. And I was like, this looks pretty great. So we said, sure, let's give it a try. We'll sublet our apartment for a year, and we'll have an adventure. We'll come out here, and so I was here for about 2 weeks before I realized this. Like, okay, I'm not going back. This is great. And it's funny too. I mean, a number of people said, "Oh, you guys are like moving to San Francisco. You're gonna want to live in the Mission." And it's like, that's kind of like the East Village of San Francisco. I was like, no, that's exactly what I don't want to do. I've done that already for like a long time, for 15 years, and I want to like live someplace where there's like trees and fresh air, and my lungs suffered terribly from living in New York, and I used to be a smoker, and the air quality there's pretty bad, and I really honestly took a hit on 9/11. We lived like about a mile away from 9/11, and they lied, of course, about the air quality. There's now all these people who were working at the site were getting cancer and stuff, and various lung diseases. And I definitely inhaled some of that dust, and I was getting bronchitis, and I can hear myself wheezing, and then I moved out here, and this is like the freshest air I've ever experienced in my life here in Mill Valley, because it's like, you got all these redwood trees, you got the air coming over the ocean and then scrubbed by all these like redwood and eucalyptus trees, and it's like a health resort almost. And after a year here, my lungs stopped squeaking, and I could breathe easily and whatever. And I liked that it was dark at night and it was quiet at night and all that good stuff. And so anyway, and the reason we could afford to live in Mill Valley is because we ended up selling the apartment in New York, and we were very lucky. We sold it in 2007, right before the crash, and then we rented out here for a while before we ended up buying this place. But that's why we had to. It's funny. I feel like we're like the Mill Valley hillbillies, especially. Most people in Mill Valley don't look like me, really. They look like the guy from if you ever seen that TV ad, the Trivago ad,
No.
And we actually call them Trivagos now. This is definitely this guy, like a classic Mill Valley guy. He's like in his 50s. He's got like short cropped, like steel gray hair, super fit, wearing like a very expensive sweater with the arms rolled down just to here. And that's not me. That's not So anyway, so then we were out here for a few years, and not to get into details, I had a health crisis. My life wasn't in danger, but I was fucked up for a few months. I was in bed I had surgery, and I was like, kind of bedridden for about 6 weeks, and started thinking like, it's like, what is it all about, man? The classic midlife crisis kind of deal. And it was like, well, like I'm working still in this field, but like working doing games, working doing advertisements, and it's just like it's kind of it's a nice way to make a living. I don't know what else I could do to make a decent living. I have no other skills or anything. I don't know how to do anything else. But at the same time, at that time I was still, like, when I moved out here, I was kind of ambitious, and I was like, and at one point I like founded a startup, and I'm going to change the world. And then something about that just changed my whole attitude about everything. It's like, okay, this is a decent, pleasant way to make a good living, but I really don't give a fuck about like making ads and whatever. It's meaningless, and especially so. I mean, everything moves so fast in that field. It's like people say like, "Oh, show me some websites you made." And it's like, well, they're all gone. They only last a year before they're replaced with a newer, better version. So it's like it's so ephemeral, So it. Again, way too late to say long story short, but I started, I started writing again, just starting to peck at it. And then I was in New York. I was visiting New York. I've gone back. Like a lot of people, I think, leave and then might come back once or twice and then don't. But I've kept up with New York. I go back once or twice a year, and I have such a great time. I still have a ton of friends there, people I've known 20, 30 years, and I'll go for 3-4 days and meet different people for breakfast, lunch, dinner, hang out, and I socialize more there in that 3 or 4 days usually than I do in like the next 6 months of the year. So it's a lot of fun. Anyway, so I was back in New York. This is like 2011, and I ran into an old friend of mine, this guy named Tim Beckett, and he started talking about sensitive skin. It's like, yeah, that was great. He's like, you ever think about doing that? I said, I don't know, maybe. And then it was funny. It was just like I was just wandering around New York, and I ran into Tim again, like the next day. I ran into him in Manhattan, and I ran into him in Brooklyn, and then we started talking, and it's like, yeah, I'm getting into this web stuff, and maybe it'd be cool to make yeah, maybe. And then the next day I ran into him again in like Brooklyn Heights. I'm like, what do you do? What's going on here? It's like, all right, let's do this, And so we started thinking about how we're going to do it, build this WordPress site. And I originally didn't want to do any print editions, but I said, let's just make a WordPress site. And so I sent out an email to and the other thing too was I realized too that still all of my best friends were involved in the arts, or were artists of some way, even though I was like, doing computer programming for a long time. So I sent out about 30-40 emails. And I said, I'm starting up the magazine again. Who wants to give me something? And, half a dozen people responded. And I put out the first issue, which is pretty short. And then again, it started taking off. So again, at this point, we've had some really great people in the magazine. We've had like John Lurie and Gary Indiana and who else offhand? I don't know. A lot of very well-known New York artist or whatever. So, again, it's gotten a name for itself, and we're on Facebook. We got over like 10,000 Facebook fans, which is kind of nice. I wish we had 100,000.
Right.
And the magazine online gets like 5,000 to 10,000 views per month, which is pretty solid.
Yeah.
Again, I wish, and I kind of feel like there's an audience out there for it. I wish it was 10 times bigger, because then I could actually maybe like really focus my efforts on it. But getting back to where we said, so now I'm like, there have been times where I've thought about like, what am I doing this for? And I remember that I stopped because I wasn't sure why I was doing it, and I kind of wish I hadn't stopped. Right. So that's where I guess was the whole point of this.
I think it was ramble. A great foundation to build on. That's a solid. That's solid. So I don't mean this to be a crass capitalistic question, and yet it could be a crass capital.
Sure.
Is the magazine right now sustaining itself with a revenue stream, or do you find that you have to fund it yourself?
It's probably about even, So what I do is I publish 1 or 2 pieces a week online, and I was doing a print version of it. Here's like the biggest issue we did. We had
that's huge. Like I look at that and I see expense involved in that.
Yeah, so these are
it's high gloss.
I have to charge $25 for this because it's got.
It's gorgeous.
It's got like color art and stuff in it, whatever. But yeah, and it was this is great. These pictures of Ruby Ray. So Ruby Ray is the one who took this famous picture of Burroughs, and so she was a friend of a friend, and these were outtakes. She actually had some outtakes of that session she did with Burroughs. So I printed a few of them in here, and we got this interview with Burroughs by Allen Ginsberg. That strangely enough, so somebody gave me that. So in 1996, Allen Ginsberg had this interview that he'd done with Burroughs, and he said to one of his assistants, "Why don't you give that to those guys at Sensitive Skin?" And I never published it. I stopped publishing it. And then so all these years later, I brought it back.
Wonderful.
So this is something that's still, people still read that, and it's a great interview. So. I don't know, what was I talking about?
Well,
we're talking about expensive.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, this got very expensive. So I basically stopped doing the print issues a couple of years ago so what I was doing for a while is I was gathering pieces, and then I would put out a print issue and then release the pieces that were in it one at a time over the next few months. And I decided to do it the other way around, which is I'm just publishing online, and I put out a piece or two a week, and then I put a little Facebook ad on there, because as fucking evil as Facebook is, it's like that gets people on the site, so I spend a few bucks to sponsor sponsor the piece, and we get traffic that way. But I'm probably going to put out a print anthology. The last issue came out a little over 2 years ago, print issue, and I'm probably going to do an anthology from time to time. I'm not sure if it's going to be in this format or if I'll do color, because again, it got very expensive.
Yeah.
And we're also doing books. We published Jenny Wade's Mayakovsky book, and and some of them sell just a little bit, and these back copies sell a little bit, and it's kind of evens out.
In the wash.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
in the end.
I mean, with actual money coming out of my pocket, not talking about the amount of time I spend on it, which is my donation or whatever, the 10 or 20 hours a month that I spend working on the magazine. If we didn't live in a crass materialistic world, somebody would be paying me a decent salary to put out this magazine, and I could just focus on the. It's funny, right? It's just like a dilemma. I wish that I could stop working, and if I focused all my attention on this and worked full time on it, then I think we could get an audience of like 100,000 people, and spread the word. But it is what it is. Well, maybe when I retire, that's kind of the idea, is that I'll be able to retire in 2 or 5 years, and then focus my attention on this and writing as well. Yeah. But
From all the names that you mentioned, the only one I recognized was Burroughs.
Okay.
And so it tells me I am not in the realm of writing. Now, Richard Hell I know because of his punk.
Sure. But he's a writer now. He hasn't made music in over 20 years.
Right,
Yeah.
and I know that a few of them, like, and I'm just spacing out the gentleman's name who, not Black Flag, but the other kind of, that was in the same, anyway.
Thurston Moore we've published from Sonic Youth. He writes poetry now. And who else I made? John Lurie was like the big indie, was the Lounge Lizards, and was in all those movies, Jarmusch movies in the 80s.
Right.
Yeah, he's in the for Stranger Than Paradise. He was the star of Stranger Than Paradise. And who else did I mention? Gary Indiana was the Village Voice head culture critic for many years. And
Well, writing is your art form.
yes.
And
Yeah. Unless I wanted to be pretentious and say, no, publishing is my art form. But
publishing is your current love.
yes, my passion,
For better
my
or
original.
worse.
The stage is my original passion. The legitimate theater. Yeah.
Do you I only caught a piece of that. I think I missed a bit there. Okay, this question keeps popping. Okay.
All right. Take two.
Damn it. That's the first time. Oh, I've been so close to it. That's the first time. All right. So picking this up.
Okay.
We were just talking about the disaster artist.
Okay.
And
Yeah. So, boy, what did I want to say about that? We're talking about like the commercial potential for the magazine and stuff,
Right,
whether it's
right.
self-sustaining. Again, the long story short is, so I have a little ad on the website which basically pays for the server space. I boost the posts on Facebook. Facebook, a bunch of evil cocksuckers, but it works, right? Which is like you were talking. There's all this delete Facebook stuff going on. People are leaving. The advertisers aren't leaving because Facebook advertising works better than any other advertising that's ever been figured out. Anyway, so I boost the post. I sponsor them when we post once or twice a week, and then I sell some back issues of the magazines and stuff like that, and it kind of evens out. The real cost is like my sweat equity, right? I'm putting in 10 to 20 hours a month on the magazine that I'm not getting paid for. It would be a dream come true if I could end up getting paid for that time, or even more so than myself. I'd love to be able to pay the artists. There's a number of people that I'd love to publish, and we even would like to be published, but they need money. They are working artists, and we're talking about how difficult that is to do at this point. And again, I was saying, a big part of it is demographics. It's like when I moved to the East Village, it was cheap to live there. I was there in the mid 80s, and the people who moved there in the 70s thought that what I was paying for rent was very expensive. I was paying $500 for a 2-bedroom apartment that I was splitting with someone. But all those people in the 70s, they're paying $80 a month for storefronts, and so you were able to just have some work a few hours a month and get by. And I have friends who were living in San Francisco in the hate in the 60s, and that's what they said, the same thing. They'd get these Victorian houses, that were giant houses, and have 10 people living there, and the rent was $40 a month. And they said, I worked like 1 or 2 days a month as a cashier, and it was enough to get by on. So those days are long gone. So but you're talking about the disaster artists. I think something that's really important to not to be an artist, but to produce something that's worthwhile. I mean, obviously you have to have the passion, and this would be the exception to that rule. I think you need to lose your ego somehow. And I think that in my earlier days, I was like, I'm going to put this book out, and then everybody will see how great I am and whatever. And I've actually, I did want to talk about this. I recently finished a novel that I'm going to start shopping around, and it's not like this super literary thing. It's a neo noir that takes place in Mill Valley, and it's about a realtor who stumbles across an old murder, he thinks, in an estate sale, and it's a social commentary about Mill Valley, and it's funny, I think. And
wow.
But it's so unambitious compared to the stuff that I was trying to do when I was young. But it was fun, and I was like, I'm putting this out there, and people have read it and really like it, and I was like, great. I'm not trying to be William Faulkner or whatever. I'm just saying I'd be settled to be John D. MacDonald at this point in my life. But I do want to talk about the disaster artists, because like you said, that's amazing. This nut whatever just put out this movie that people say is the worst movie of all time, but at the same time people still watch it and are talking about it, and they make a big movie about the making of it. And it reminds me a lot of the same story is Ed Wood, the guy who made Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is, maybe The Room has surpassed it, but for many years was considered, this is the worst movie ever made. Right. And I think it was John Waters who said, no, it's not the worst movie ever made. The worst movie ever made is boring. Right. You can watch Plan 9 from Outer Space and have a great time. You'll laugh, you'll watch it more than once, you'll watch it with your friends. Right. And compared to like you were saying, so what were the best picture winners of the same year that that came, I don't know, fucking Ben-Hur or
right.
What was it called, Marnie?
I don't know.
The one, the Ernest Borgnine. Right. It's who the fuck watches that? Right. Why would anybody watch that movie? But people still watch Plan 9. Right. And they're still watching The Room because they're fun. So, what does this word quality mean? It's just the worst art is boring, right?
You and I also had just mentioned about Van Gogh. Right. And Van Gogh was totally unrecognized during his time. Right. And now is recognized as one of the greatest artists.
Right. And I mean, that's I think maybe the highest achievement that art can produce is, with Van Gogh, is he changed the way that people looked at paintings. Right, that's what I think the highest. He sort of changed something about human perception, about the way the human mind works. It's at that time, nobody wanted to buy his paint. People were like, this guy's fucking psycho. And it was like, well, he's just throwing blobs of paint on there. This is garbage. And it took a while for people and a few people maybe recognized it. Like Gauguin, I guess, recognized that it was great, right? But people probably thought the same of Gauguin at the time. Like, what is this fruit on the table? What is, but that to me is like the highest achievement that you can get from art, is it actually changed people's perception of the world or changed the way people think.
So do you think, because you mentioned earlier that in order to create art of value, one has to let go of ego?
I think so. I mean, which is maybe just true for me. It's been valuable for. I don't know that Picasso ever let go of his ego.
Right. And Hemingway came to mind.
Yeah.
And there's the woman who wrote Rhymes with Orange. Are you familiar with that book? Mm-hmm. It was a novel I read in college, and she's, one of her quotes is, "I'm the greatest American novelist ever." Yeah. It was a great book, but
yeah, I don't know. Maybe it works for them. So I suppose it's easier to feel that way if you're world famous for doing what you're doing. Then it's probably a little easier to carry that ego around because you've got the affirmation of it constantly. But I don't know. But I think now that I'm thinking about it, I think Picasso's best work was behind him by the time he became world famous, and the same with Hemingway. The best stuff. And Fitzgerald, their best stuff was done before they were famous. Fame kills people. It's terrible. It's I'll say something too. It's funny. It's like I was famous for 3 days a number of years ago. I wrote an article for a tech journal called Read Write, and it was about how Facebook, how about dead people were liking stuff on Facebook. And I was just kind of noticed this. It's like I saw something as like, and I can't remember. It's like, your friend who died 6 months ago likes Walmart. And I was like, no, first of all, he's dead. Second of all, he didn't like Walmart. What the fuck is going on here? So, I mean, Facebook's a fucking cesspool, and it always has been. Wow. And so I spoke to a number of people about this, and there was like there were people, all sorts of people saying, you like so-and-so. My anarchist hippie friend who lives in the East Village likes Citibank. And I was like, no, he doesn't. And there was all sorts of explanations as to how this could have happened. But the worst part was like, people were actually dead. We're still liking stuff on Facebook. Anyway, I wrote this article, and, it went viral. And it got like 3 million reads in like a week. And I mean, it was like on the front page of Dig. It's like, why is Facebook liking? And all sorts of people were calling me. I was doing interviews for newspapers. I went to a talk by Guy Kawasaki, who's like somebody I've admired for a long time. He's a tech guru kind of guy, writer for since the 80s. And I'm just sitting down there, and the presenter says, "Oh, Bernard, you've got to meet Guy Kawasaki. You've got to meet this guy. He's the one who did the face." And Guy Kawasaki, I'm like, "Wow, how did you figure this out?" And I'm like, "What the fuck is going on here?" and after 3 days or so, it wore off. It was gone. But I had a taste of what fame was for a minute, and it was a mind-altering drug, basically. And it felt great. Yeah. It was like really, people were coming up to me and like saying, "Oh, I want to talk. You're great. I love you. I don't know you, but wow, you're, Again, lasted for, but it was like incredibly euphoric. Yeah. And it was an interesting experience. And I thought, like, how fucked up would you get if you got this all the time? Or especially, like, how fucked up would you be if you, like, were a child star and got this from the time you were a kid? Like, oh my God, you'd be so twisted, It's like...
Man, like, I'm just now, Mick Jagger pops into my head.
Yeah.
Because, he's kept that Rolling Stones machine running for so long.
Yeah.
And yet he's, a 76-year-old who's dating 20-year-olds, and
You know,
but on the other hand,
seems crazy, but at the same time, God bless them. You know,
right? Exactly, and they're human. They have freedom of will.
Yeah,
no one's coercing them into that situation.
But you know, I suppose you see very, very rich septuagenarians occasionally marrying much younger, beautiful women. But there's something about the fame. He's rich and famous, but like he's kind of like
Jagger.
dried up, kind of like.
Well, and he's not though. At 70 plus years old, he's still jumping around.
Oh yeah, no, that's great.
An hour and a half.
But it's funny. It was just like my daughter, when she was 13 or 14, got into the Rolling Stones, and there's pictures of Mick Jagger from like the 60s, and thought he was dreamy. And then she's like, "Oh my God, I just saw what Mick Jagger looks like now." And I said, "Really? Why don't you take a look and see what Keith Richards looks like now?" She was like, "Ah!" Yeah. And I think that was like the end of her Stones fascination.
That's too bad.
But what are these like gorgeous 22-year-old models doing with this like guy in his 70s? It's like they're massively attracted to the fame. It's just like it's a strange thing.
And you had a taste of it. So with the taste that you've had, there's the positive of fame too. Like a sustained fame. Oprah Winfrey comes to mind, the Dalai Lama, some people who have been able to sustain a international recognition and adoration and continually move it into positive.
Yeah, but I think that, the Dalai Lama might be more of an exception to the rule of how he's like handled that fame. Right. I really do think it's like for many people, or for most people, it's a destructive sort of force.
But can it be like the 4-minute mile where, okay, if someone's doing it, then I know it's humanly possible and I can...
Well, sure, there's the idea of having heroes, which is good, especially, I guess at any age it's good to have role models and people you admire, and clearly some people handle it better than others, I think of but I think of like all those child stars, like how messed up they got, like Danny Bonaducci or Tatum O'Neal or somebody like that.
Now Danny came out of it, and a lot of them have come out of it.
I think Tatum has too.
Has she? I don't know.
I think so. I knew her. She was a good friend of a good friend of mine in New York, so I met her a few times, and she was a sweet kid. But she had a lot of shit she had to deal with. Being married to John McEnroe for a while and having kids with him was no picnic, apparently.
Well, yes, but that opens the whole realm of marriage and that.
Yeah.
And all right, so to kind of conclude, and unfortunately there's that 15 minutes that only you and I will ever be aware of.
Oh, it's like the Nixon tapes. God, if they only could dig up what was on that 15 missing minutes, man, the whole thing would come crumbling down.
That's the linchpin. But do you still experience that the shadow, the voice within that's saying, "This is all a hoax"?
Oh yeah. Well, every day. I mean,
really?
I have real suspicions of people who don't feel that way.
Really?
Who aren't in touch with the shadow. You got to be in touch with your shadow, right? You got to know
I don't know.
You got to know your shadow. You got to, But it's at the same point, it's something you have to come to accept those dark parts of yourself, I think, and just go, well, okay, that's part of me, and move on.
Right.
You can't let it defeat you. If you end up like embracing that shadow, you become like, I don't know, the white supremacist skinhead or something, where you turn like, where you have so much self-hatred that the only way that you can survive it is by turning it outward, right? So I think that's the danger of that. But I think, geez, an artist without some, it's funny because I think to be like a really incredible, successful artist like a Picasso, or you can think of anybody. It's like you kind of have to be, maybe you do have to have like that ego run wild and have no self-doubt and have like this incredibly irrational self-confidence, I mean, to bring in the sports analogy, it's like I'm thinking of somebody like Steph Curry, who's like, clearly like head and shoulders above most other basketball players. And, the guy who's like his backup or whatever, the guy who's playing him, who's not an all-star, has to think, I'm better than that guy. I'm going to beat him today. You know what I mean? You kind of need that sort of irrational self-confidence. But I think that makes you end up being like a shitty human being, think of like, again, the sports, I think of like what like a horrible human being Michael Jordan is.
I don't know.
Yeah, he's there's lots of stories. He's not a nice guy. Got in fist fights with his teammates and stuff like that. Kind of. But I mean, he was the greatest basketball player in the world, and he knew it, and he wanted to let you know it. And maybe it's a funny thing. It's just like so. If I was on a basketball team, he'd be the guy I'd want to play with. If I was hanging around getting a cup of coffee, shooting the shit, I wouldn't want to hang around with him.
And that, I think, is like one of my fundamental things in life right now. Do you have to be a dickhead to propel one's will and energy into a creative...
again, I don't think you do. I think you can do it by letting go of the ego and just sort of like naturally just like, here's what I am, here's what I'm doing. But I think it's maybe to get to that supernatural level, you have to be a fucking dick, and you look at so many people who've achieved that level of fame, and of course there's exceptions, but so many of them, it's about sacrifice. There was a certain intense level of selfishness, that they needed to achieve that. I'm going off into a completely different tangent, but I just saw that movie the other day, The Death of Stalin.
Okay.
Which I thought was a great movie, and really, the stuff that was going on was horrifying, and they treated it as a dark comedy. It was a very dark comedy, but thinking about like what. I had this realization. So like Stalin was thought of like as a god by like a lot of those people. Even during the terror, even the people he was terrorizing like kind of worshipped him as this god. And maybe one of the reasons is that like his son was captured by the Nazis in World War II, and the Russians had captured Field Marshal Paulus during the Battle of Stalingrad, I think it was, and the Germans said, "We'll trade you your son for Paulus," and Stalin said, "I'm not going to trade a lieutenant for a field marshal. Are you crazy?" And his son died in a German POW camp. So it's horrible. Like what kind of person would do something like that? But at the same time, it occurred to me that like maybe that's why people it's almost it's like he let his son die for us, and and he gave this sacrifice, and I think that probably had to do with the people. A lot of people I thought like, oh my God, what a monster. But I think a lot of people also went like, yes, he's one of us. We're all suffering and losing family members in this war, and he did too. And maybe that's what you. Or to think about Donald Trump. What is this fucking guy? He's screwed over like every person he's ever met. I heard something really, somebody say something really interesting about him. I can't remember who it was. It was like Mark Cuban or Warren Buffett or some other, whatever. And he's like, find me one person who can say, I went into business with Donald Trump and I made a lot of money. Or I worked with Donald Trump and he was my mentor and he taught me everything. I was like, there's nobody like that. He's just, just stab people in the back and famously like would stiff contractors left and right, and, had the team of lawyers who were ready to sue everybody. And that worked when he was like just honestly like a second-rate developer in New York. I mean, really, even in New York City, the big developers are like the Dursts or whatever, who own like fucking 20% of Manhattan or something like that. Trump's got a hotel here and there. He's a 2-bit player with those guys, but he's the fucking president.
He's the president of the United States.
And he did it all with like pure narcissism.
Yeah.
And it's strange to see like interviews with his supporters who still, they love him.
Yeah.
They think he's great.
I think there's potential for 8 years.
Anything can happen.
That's obvious.
Yeah. Yeah, but exactly. Who is anybody to say that's not going to happen after the fact that he, became president? But if that can happen, anything can happen.
Right. And what's cool about anything can happen is potentially this energy happening from our kids.
Yeah.
It could, anything can happen. Like maybe there is going to be the word that popped into mind is immaculate consciousness, that
raising of the consciousness. Absolutely. We're watching it happen, and it's great, and real change in society, with some exceptions, has never come from politicians. It comes from the streets. It comes from the bottom up. It will come from you think of all of these. I don't know. Of course, I have a jaundiced view. My kids grew up in the Bay Area, so they're super liberal and everything. But I just, in general, see the attitude of, it's funny just thinking about Bush, essentially won the election in 2004, running against gay marriage. Right? He basically he won. I think it was Ohio and Pennsylvania was close, and he basically came out. They're gonna let the gays marry and it'll be the end of the family. And he basically won the election, his re-election on that issue. And now people are even just 15 years later, people are like, who cares?
Right.
And it was funny. It was a few years ago, my daughter had to write a paper for school for or against gay marriage. And she literally didn't understand the question. So I don't get it. This is against, why? What? Why would anybody be against two people getting married or in love? I don't understand.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
So there's hope for the world.
There is hope for the world.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions I'd like to wrap up with.
Okay.
Has the title "Sensitive Skin" garnered more meaning for you than what you witnessed on a shampoo bottle?
All things considered, I wish I'd chosen a better title for the magazine, because people tend to think we still get people think, oh, this is a porno mag. People send pornography submissions to me, and also people think it's a cosmetics ad. I still get people signing up great, would you be interested in some free skincare samples? I love your magazine. It's no, you don't. If you'd spend 30 seconds looking at it, you would not be offering to send me, skincare samples.
Right. Unless you wrote your ingredients really well.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. And my next question is, are you comfortable sharing the title of your novel about Mel?
Yeah, so my novel is called, and again, it's either, idiocy or genius. I don't know. My best friend used to call me an idiot savant, so I don't know. But it's called, it's about a realtor who live. I don't know if that got on the tape or not. It's about a realtor in Mill Valley who stumbles across a murder, or thinks he has, and it's a neo-noir. So it's written, I'm paying homage to James M. Cain and all sorts of different mystery writers using that sort of language. He's this, he's a realtor in Mill Valley, but thinks he's a tough guy detective. Gumshoe, right? And it's all based social commentary about Mill Valley. So anyway, the book is called There's Never Been a Better Time to Die. Right. Because what realtors say, there's never been a better time to buy. So yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Coming soon to a fine retailer near you before they're all driven out of business by Amazon. It'll be on Amazon at least at some point.
And is there anything you'd like to say or share that?
I don't know. I could just keep yakking about all sorts of things. I'll talk about,
It's a beautiful world. For you. It's a beautiful world. beautiful world. It's a beautiful world. It's a beautiful